Mr. Thompson, I'm very sorry. We did everything we could. Your wife didn't survive the procedure.
I understand. Thank you for letting me know.
The voice on the phone was professional, rehearsed, sympathetic in that practiced hospital administrator way. Mr. Thompson, I'm very sorry. We did everything we could. Your wife didn't survive the procedure. There was a pause. Just 3 seconds of silence that contained an entire marriage. Then Stephen Thompson's voice, quiet and controlled. I understand. Thank you for letting me know. No tremor, no break, just acknowledgement, like he'd been informed of a delayed shipment. Clara Morrison Thompson had spent 7 years learning how to read her husband's silences, and if she'd been conscious to hear that one, she would have finally understood what she'd been too devoted to see. Relief sounds like nothing at all. But Clara wasn't conscious. She was lying on an operating table, her heart still and silent, monitors flatlined, a surgical team stepping back with that particular exhaustion that comes from losing a patient who should have lived. 22 minutes of failed resuscitation. The lead surgeon had called it. Time of death, 2:47 in the afternoon. A routine procedure to remove a benign abdominal mass, derailed by an undetected clotting disorder that caused catastrophic hemorrhaging. It happened sometimes. Rarely, but it happened. Clara had chosen this week specifically for the surgery because Stefan had a critical merger closing. She'd scheduled it around his calendar the way she'd scheduled everything for 7 years, making sure her body's inconvenient need for medical intervention wouldn't interfere with his work. Even dying, she tried not to be a burden. The hospital administrator, a woman named Linda Cortez who delivered this kind of news too many times, sat in her office after the call ended and noted something in the file. The husband had asked about next steps, about who to contact for the body, about paperwork. He'd been efficient. He hadn't asked if she'd suffered. Stefan stood in his corner office on the 42nd floor of Thompson Pharma headquarters, phone still in his hand, and looked out at the city spread below him like a kingdom waiting to be claimed. His father, Owen Thompson, had built this empire over 4 decades. Pharmaceuticals, research divisions, patent portfolios worth billions. The company employed 14,000 people across 6 countries and produced medications that reached millions of patients annually. And Stefan had been the heir apparent his entire adult life, groomed and positioned and monitored by a father who'd never quite trusted him to hold it alone. But Owen was dying. Slowly, stubbornly, but undeniably. And his will, revised 4 times in 2 years, had contained a complication Stefan had been trying to navigate for 8 months. Clara, 40% of the estate, designated to his wife in irrevocable trust, fiduciary authority over ethical compliance divisions, board voting rights, veto power over restructuring that affected patient access. Owen had never trusted Stefan's judgment completely, had decided the quiet bioethicist daughter-in-law he barely acknowledged was the appropriate check on his son's ambitions. Stefan had spent months consulting attorneys about how to contest it, minimize it, navigate around it. Now he wouldn't have to. He returned to the conference room where 6 executives waited, mid-presentation on the merger terms. Stefan sat down, smoothed his tie, and gestured for them to continue. Sorry for the interruption. Family matter. Let's keep moving. The CFO hesitated. Everything all right? It will be, Stefan said. Continue. He'd make the other calls after the meeting. The ones that mattered. 1 hour and 40 minutes later, Stefan sat alone in his office again, door closed, and made 3 phone calls in careful sequence. The first was to his personal attorney, David Reich. David, it's Stefan. Clara passed away this afternoon, surgical complication. David's response was immediate sympathy, condolences, the appropriate shock. Stefan let him finish. Thank you. I need you to start preliminary work on estate logistics. I know we'll need to wait for probate, but I want to understand the timeline now that the situation has changed. David's pause was brief but present. Of course, Stefan, I'm very sorry for your loss. We can discuss details later this week. Tomorrow, Stefan said. Let's discuss it tomorrow. The second call was to Howard Marsh, the Thompson family estate attorney who'd managed Owen's increasingly complex will revisions. Howard Stephen Thompson, I wanted to inform you that Clara died today. I know this affects the estate structure, and I'll need guidance on how we proceed given my father's current health situation. Howard Marsh had practiced estate law for 38 years and had developed a finely tuned instinct for what grief sounded like. This wasn't it. Stefan, I'm deeply sorry. This is unexpected. Yes, we'll need to review the documents. Clara's designation will need to be restructured. I'll pull the files. How quickly can we move on this? Stefan asked. We'll need a death certificate. and there are statutory waiting periods, but I can have preliminary assessments to you within a few days. Good. Thank you, Howard. The third call, Stefan made from his personal cell phone, not the office line. A woman answered on the second ring. Hey, how did the meeting go? Vanessa Cole, corporate strategist, merger specialist, and for the past 8 months, the person who made Stefan feel like something other than his father's disappointment. Meeting's fine, but something else happened. Stefan walked to the window, voice low, even though he was alone. Clara didn't make it through the surgery. Vanessa's sharp intake of breath. Oh my God. Stefan, I'm so sorry. Are you okay? I'm fine. It's a shock, but I'm fine. Do you need me to come there? What do you need? Stefan closed his eyes, felt something loosen in his chest that had been tight for months. I need you to know that it's handled. Everything we've been waiting for, planning around. We don't have to wait anymore. The silence on Vanessa's end was longer this time. Stefan. I know how that sounds. I loved Clara, but this changes everything, Vanessa. The will provisions, the board structure, the succession plan. It's clear now. Vanessa's voice was careful. We should talk about this in person, not over the phone. Come to the apartment tonight. I'll be tied up with arrangements for a few hours, but tonight. All right, tonight. And Stefan, I really am sorry. I know. I'll see you later. He ended the call and stood at the window for another moment, watching the city lights begin to flicker on as dusk settled. Stefan Thompson had not celebrated his wife's death. He wasn't cruel. He'd even felt a genuine pang of something like sadness when the hospital called. A brief recognition that Clara had been a good person, a kind person, someone who tried very hard to make him happy. But beneath the sadness was something stronger and more honest. Relief. The obstacle was gone. The complication removed. His father's will would need revision, and Stefan would finally have uncontested control of the empire he'd been born to inherit. He didn't hate Clara. He'd just stopped seeing her years ago, and her absence now felt less like loss and more like simplification. What Stefan couldn't know, was that 17 miles away in the surgical wing of Mercy General Hospital, a junior resident named Dr. Sarah Vance was staring at a cardiac monitor with her heart pounding. Dr. Brennan, she called, voice tight. I'm seeing something. The lead surgeon, Dr. Marcus Brennan, had already removed his surgical gloves and was halfway to the door. He turned back, irritated. Vance, she's gone. We called it. I know, but look at this. Dr. Brennan crossed back to the monitors. The flat line that had been steady for 4 minutes now showed something. A flutter. Barely perceptible, probably artifact, but that's just electrical noise, he said, but his voice had lost certainty. Sir, what if it's not? Dr. Brennan looked at Clara's body, still and pale on the table. He looked at the monitor. He made a decision. Restart compressions. Get me another amp of epi. Move. The surgical team, already mentally transitioning to paperwork in the next case, snapped back into crisis mode. Compressions resumed. Epinephrine pushed. Defibrillator charged. Clear. Clara's body jerked with the shock. Nothing. Again, clear. Another shock. Another terrible silence. Then, a beep. Faint, irregular, but present. A heartbeat. I've got sinus rhythm, the anesthesiologist called out, disbelief in her voice. It's weak, but it's there. Stabilize her, Dr. Brennan ordered. Get her to ICU, full support, neuroconsult standing by. I want every monitor we have on her. The team moved with renewed urgency, no longer managing death but fighting for life. Clara Morrison Thompson had been dead for 26 minutes. Now she was alive again, unconscious and critically unstable, but alive. The hospital's protocol required immediate family notification when a patient's status changed this dramatically. Linda Cortez pulled up Stefan Thompson's contact information and dialed. It rang, and went to voicemail. She tried the office number. Same result. She left messages on both, urgent but professional, asking him to call back immediately regarding his wife's status change. Then she flagged the file for follow-up and moved to the next crisis. Stefan's phone was off. He was with Vanessa in the apartment he'd leased 6 months ago under a corporate account, discussing timelines and opportunities and what the future looked like now that complications had resolved themselves. He didn't check his messages until after midnight. By then, Clara had been alive again for 9 hours, and the information asymmetry that would eventually destroy him had already begun. Clara didn't dream while she was dead. There was no tunnel, no light, no cinematic near-to-death revelation, just absence, complete and dark. But when consciousness began to return, fragmented and strange, it came with pain. Not physical pain, though that would arrive soon enough. Emotional pain, the kind that lived in the space between sleep and waking, where truth couldn't be avoided. She'd chosen the surgery date around Stefan's schedule. Even her own body had been negotiated around his convenience. That thought surfaced first, before she even knew where she was or what had happened. Always making herself smaller, always accommodating. The ICU was dim when Clara's eyes first opened, just barely, lids heavy and vision blurred. Machines beeped in steady rhythm. There was a tube in her throat, pressure in her chest, and nothing made sense. A face appeared above her. A woman in scrubs, older, with kind eyes. "Clara, my name is Ruth. I'm your nurse. You're in the ICU. You've been through a very serious medical event, but you're safe now. Don't try to talk, you're intubated. Just rest." Clara's eyes closed again, too tired to process, too tired to be afraid. Ruth Morales had been an ICU nurse for 22 years and had seen every variation of family crisis, medical tragedy, and human resilience. She'd also developed a finely tuned radar for husbands who didn't belong at their wives' bedsides. Stefan Thompson had arrived at the hospital 4 hours after Clara was moved to ICU. 4 hours after multiple messages were left on his phone. When he finally appeared, he'd looked genuinely shocked that Clara was alive, which Ruth understood. The initial report had been death. Resurrection wasn't common, but what Ruth noticed was what came after the shock. Not relief, not overwhelming gratitude, just a kind of careful recalibration, like he was adjusting strategy mid-game. He'd sat beside Clara's bed for 40 minutes that first night, but he'd spent 35 of those minutes on his phone, texting, emailing, occasionally glancing at his unconscious wife like she was a problem he was trying to solve. When the attending physician came in to brief him on Clara's status, on the clotting disorder they'd discovered, on the neurological assessments they'd be running, Stefan had asked good questions. But the questions Ruth noticed most were the ones about long-term prognosis, about cognitive function, about Clara's capacity to make legal decisions. Those weren't the questions of a man terrified of losing his wife. Those were the questions of a man calculating risk. Ruth didn't say anything. It wasn't her place. But she noted it, filed it away in the mental catalog she kept of things that didn't sit right. Over the next 3 days, as Clara remained unconscious but stable, Stefan's visits followed a pattern. He'd arrive when staff were present, sit close, hold Clara's hand. He'd ask appropriate questions, accept updates with solemn nods, play the role of devoted husband with perfect precision. But when he thought he was alone, when he believed Ruth or the other nurses were occupied elsewhere, his attention would drift. He'd check his phone constantly, step into the hallway for hushed phone conversations, return with his jaw tight and his expression calculating. Once, Ruth entered the room quietly and overheard part of a phone call. Stefan's voice, low and clipped. "I don't know yet. The doctors say her brain function looks normal, but she hasn't woken up. It's complicated." A pause. "No, I can't make that decision yet. Just, we need to wait and see what her condition is when she's conscious. Then we'll know what we're working with." Ruth had cleared her throat deliberately, and Stefan had ended the call quickly, smoothly, turning to her with a concerned husband's expression. "Any change?" he'd asked. "Not yet," Ruth had said. "But her vitals are strong. She's fighting." "Good, that's good." But his voice had sounded like he was trying to convince himself. On the third day, Clara's neurological responses improved enough that the medical team decided to reduce sedation and remove the intubation tube. If her breathing remained stable, she'd be able to wake fully. Stefan was in a board meeting when it happened. Ruth was the one holding Clara's hand when her eyes opened, truly opened, and focused. "Welcome back," Ruth said softly. "You've been through a lot, Clara, but you're safe." Clara's voice when the tube was finally removed was raw and barely audible. "What happened?" "You had a complication during surgery. Your heart stopped, but the team brought you back. You've been in the ICU for 3 days. Clara's hand moved to her chest, feeling the IV lines, the monitor leads, the proof of crisis survived. "Stefan?" Ruth hesitated, just a fraction of a second. "He's been notified. I'm sure he'll be here soon." But Clara caught the hesitation. Even through the fog of medication and trauma, she caught it. "How long has he known I'm alive?" Ruth could have deflected, could have offered a comforting non-answer, but something in Clara's eyes, a clarity that didn't match her physical weakness, made Ruth choose honesty. Since the night you were revived, we called him multiple times but his phone was off. He got the messages and came in about 4 hours later. Clara's eyes closed. 4 hours. He was probably in shock, Ruth offered, though her tone suggested she didn't believe it. No, Clara whispered. He wasn't. Something in the way she said it made Ruth pull a chair closer. Clara, I don't want to overstep, but is there someone else I can call for you? Family, friends? You shouldn't be alone in this. Clara's eyes opened again, and Ruth saw something that made her ache. Recognition. The look of a woman confirming something she'd suspected, but never let herself fully believe. I've been alone for a long time, Clara said quietly. I just didn't know it. Ruth squeezed her hand. You're not alone now, not while you're here. Over the next 2 days, as Clara grew stronger and more alert, she began to observe. Stefan visited twice, once in the morning before work, once in the evening after. He brought flowers, held her hand when the medical staff did rounds, asked about her pain levels, her treatment plan, her discharge timeline. But Clara, who'd spent 7 years reading his micro-expressions, his tone shifts, his tells, saw what she'd trained herself not to see before. He didn't want her to die. That would be too simple, too definitive. He wanted her diminished, manageable, ideally incapacitated enough that decisions could be made for her, around her, without her input. When Dr. Brennan came in to discuss her remarkable recovery, Stefan had interrupted. But what about long-term effects, cognitive issues, memory problems? Dr. Brennan had smiled. Actually, Clara's neurological function is excellent. No deficits we can detect. She's extraordinarily lucky. Stefan had smiled too, but Clara saw his jaw tighten. That's wonderful, he'd said. Really wonderful. Later, when they were alone, he'd sat beside her bed and taken her hand. You scared me, he said. When they called and said you didn't make it, I didn't know what to do. Clara looked at their joined hands. His grip was light, performative. What did you do? She asked. When you got the call? The question seemed to catch him off guard. What do you mean? I mean, what did you do? Did you come to the hospital right away? Stefan's expression shifted, just slightly. I was in a meeting. I had to process it first. Then there were calls I had to make, people to notify. Who did you call? Clara, why does this matter? You're alive. That's what matters. But Clara didn't let go of the question. Who did you call first? Stefan withdrew his hand, stood, paced to the window. I don't remember exactly. My attorney, I think. The family lawyer. I was in shock, Clara. I wasn't thinking clearly. You called your attorney before you came to see me. It wasn't a question. I called several people. It's all a blur. Clara watched him, this man she'd loved with devastating completeness, and felt something inside her crack wide open. Not her heart. That had broken years ago, so slowly she hadn't noticed. This was different. This was the breaking of the illusion she'd built to survive the breaking of her heart. You didn't come to the hospital for 4 hours, she said quietly. Stefan turned, and for a moment, she saw something flash across his face. Annoyance, maybe, or calculation. Who told you that? Does it matter? Clara, I was dealing with a crisis. I got here as soon as I could. You thought I was dead, and you spent 4 hours making phone calls about logistics. That's not fair. You don't understand what it's like to get that kind of news, to have to think about arrangements, responsibilities. Clara felt a strange calm settling over her, the kind that comes when you stop fighting a truth you've been avoiding. You're right, she said. I don't understand, because if you'd died, Stefan, I would have dropped everything. I wouldn't have been able to breathe, much less make strategic phone calls. This isn't the time for this conversation. You're recovering from trauma. I've been recovering from trauma for 7 years, Clara said. I just called it marriage. Stefan stared at her, something like shock registering in his eyes. Clara had never spoken to him like this. Clara didn't push back. Clara didn't challenge. But Clara had also never died before. You need to rest, he said finally, voice tight. We'll talk when you're stronger. He left without kissing her goodbye. Ruth, who'd been standing just outside the room, stepped in after he was gone. You okay? Clara looked at her, and for the first time in 3 days she smiled. It was small and sad, but real. I think I might be, eventually. Ruth sat down in the chair Stefan had vacated. Can I ask you something and you can tell me to mind my business if I'm overstepping? Go ahead. How long has your marriage been like this? Clara thought about it. It's never been good, but I think I stopped mattering to him around year 3. I just spent the next 4 years trying not to notice. Why? It was such a simple question. Clara had asked herself 1,000 times and never found an answer that didn't make her feel pathetic. Because I loved him. Because I thought if I was patient enough, supportive enough, understanding enough, he'd see me again. And now? Clara looked at the monitors beside her bed, at the proof that her heart had stopped and started again. Now I know that you can't earn someone's love by erasing yourself. You disappear, and they don't even notice you're gone until it's convenient. Ruth was quiet for a moment. Then she reached into her scrubs pocket and pulled out a small notepad, wrote something down, tore off the page. This is my personal cell number. I don't usually do this, but I want you to have it. If you need anything, if you need someone to talk to, or if things get complicated, call me. Clara took the paper, something warm and unfamiliar rising in her chest. Kindness, from a stranger who saw her more clearly in 3 days than her husband had in 7 years. Thank you, Ruth. Take care of yourself, Clara. Really take care of yourself. Not him, you. After Ruth left, Clara lay in the dim ICU room and let herself think the thoughts she'd been avoiding. Stefan had called his attorney when he thought she was dead, had asked about timelines, had met with someone, probably Vanessa, the woman Clara knew about but had never confronted because confrontation required believing she deserved better. He'd spent 4 hours doing damage control while she lay in this hospital, revived and alone. And when he learned she'd survived, he hadn't been relieved. He'd been inconvenienced. Clara reached for her phone on the bedside table. It had been brought from her personal effects, charged by one of the nurses. She opened Stefan's text messages. He didn't know she had his passcode. He'd never thought to hide it from her because he'd never thought she'd look. Why would she? Devoted wives didn't snoop. Devoted wives trusted. She scrolled to the day of the surgery. There were no frantic messages to friends or family. No desperate prayers or calls for support. Just cold, efficient communications. Messages to his attorney, to the estate lawyer, and one text to an unsaved number sent 2 hours after the hospital's first call. Situation changed. Call me. Clara stared at those 3 words for a long time. Then she scrolled further back. Weeks, months, messages to the same unsaved number, carefully worded but obvious to anyone who knew how to read them. Dinner plans, late meetings, can't wait to see you. References to an apartment Clara didn't know about. She should have felt devastated, betrayed, destroyed. Instead, she felt clarity. This was who he was. Not who he'd become under stress, not a temporary version warped by pressure. This was who he'd always been, and she'd simply chosen not to see it. Clara closed the messages and opened her email. She hadn't checked it in days, and the inbox was full of automated notifications, newsletters, irrelevant noise. But one email stood out. From Owen Thompson, sent 4 days ago, the morning of her surgery. The subject line read, "Something you should know." Clara's hands trembled as she opened it. "Clara, I know we haven't spoken much over the years, and that's my failure, not yours. But I need you to know something before my health deteriorates further. My will contains provisions you're not aware of. 40% of the estate is designated to you in irrevocable trust, with fiduciary authority over all ethical compliance divisions and patient advocacy programs. Stefan doesn't know the full extent of your designation. I never told him. I didn't trust what he'd do with that information. I'm telling you now because you deserve to know what you're walking into. You're stronger than he's given you credit for, stronger than you've given yourself credit for. I hope you never need to use this information, but if you do, know that the power is yours, not his. Owen." Clara read it 3 times. Owen had sent this the morning of her surgery, hours before everything went wrong. He'd known that Stefan was waiting for inheritances like other men waited for promotions, known that his son had been counting days until power transferred, and he'd given Clara the thing Stefan wanted most: authority, control, power. Clara set the phone down and stared at the ceiling. She'd nearly died. Stefan had celebrated. Owen had given her 40% of a pharmaceutical empire, and she was the only one who knew all 3 pieces. Information asymmetry, her academic brain whispered. The foundation of every power shift in history. She had information Stefan thought impossible. He believed she was too weak, too broken, too devoted to ever challenge him. He'd spent 7 years teaching her to be invisible, and she'd been an excellent student. But invisibility, Clara was beginning to understand, was also the perfect position from which to observe. For 7 years she'd watched, learned his patterns, understood his strategies, absorbed information she wasn't meant to hear because no one thought she mattered enough to be discreet around. She knew about the offshore accounts, the vendor contracts that didn't make sense, the restructuring plans designed to consolidate power before Owen died. She'd been silent because she thought silence was devotion, but silence could also be strategy. Clara reached for her phone again and composed an email to an address she hadn't used in 4 years. Victor Brennan, the attorney who'd handled her mother's estate. The one lawyer in her life who wasn't connected to the Thompson family infrastructure. Victor, this is Clara Morrison Thompson. I hope you remember me. I need legal counsel on a sensitive family matter. It's urgent. Can we speak confidentially? She hit send before she could second-guess herself. Then she lay back and let the tears come, finally. Not because her marriage was over. It had been over for years. Not because Stefan had betrayed her. She'd known that too, in the parts of herself she'd learned to silence. She cried because she'd nearly died trying not to inconvenience him. She cried because she'd spent 7 years making herself smaller, and he'd never once asked her to stop. She cried because Ruth, a stranger, had shown her more kindness in 3 days than her husband had shown her in 7 years. And she cried because she was done performing, done accommodating, done erasing herself for someone who'd celebrated her erasure. The tears were grief, yes, but they were also release. Clara Morrison Thompson had died on that operating table, and the woman who'd come back didn't owe anyone her silence anymore. 2 days later, Owen Thompson arrived at the hospital unannounced. Clara was out of ICU by then, moved to a recovery wing, strong enough to sit up and take short walks with assistants. The doctors were calling her recovery remarkable. Ruth had visited twice on her days off, just to check in. Stefan had visited once, briefly, citing urgent business. When Owen appeared in the doorway, leaning heavily on a cane, Clara almost didn't recognize him. He'd deteriorated significantly since she'd last seen him at a family dinner 3 months ago. His skin was gray, his frame skeletal beneath expensive clothes. But his eyes were sharp. Clara. Owen, I didn't expect you. He moved slowly into the room and settled into the visitor's chair with visible effort. I heard what happened. Wanted to see for myself that you were all right. It was more attention than he'd paid her in 7 years of marriage. I'm recovering. The doctors say I was lucky. Lucky, Owen repeated, and something in his tone suggested he didn't believe in luck. Did you get my email? Clara's breath caught. Yes. And I don't know what to say. I had no idea. Owen nodded slowly. That was intentional. I didn't tell Stefan the specifics of your designation. He knows there are provisions for you, but he thinks they're minor, symbolic. He has no idea you hold 40%. Why? Clara asked. Why give me that much power? Owen looked at her for a long moment, and Clara saw something she'd never seen from him before. Regret. Because I watched you for 7 years, and I saw what my son did to you, how he used you, ignored you, took everything you gave and offered nothing back. I saw you disappear piece by piece, and I did nothing to stop it. His voice was rough, tired. I built this company on principles that mattered once: patient care, ethical research, making medicine accessible. Then it became about profit, about legacy, about empire. And I raised a son who sees all of it as his birthright, something to exploit. You don't trust him, Clara said quietly. No, I don't. And I heard what happened when the hospital called him. I made inquiries. Clara's chest tightened. What did you hear? That he didn't come for 4 hours, that when he finally arrived and learned you'd survived, he didn't seem relieved, he seemed inconvenienced. Owen's hand tightened on his cane. My son thought your death was convenient. That tells me everything I need to know about who should hold power in this family after I'm gone. Clara felt something shift inside her, tectonic and irreversible. He doesn't love me, she said. Not a question, just acknowledgement. No, Owen agreed. I don't think he does. I'm not sure he's capable of it. The honesty was brutal and clarifying. What do I do? Clara asked. With the power you're giving me? Owen leaned forward slightly. You use it. You don't owe Stefan your silence or your compliance. You don't owe this family your erasure. The trust is irrevocable. The authority is legally yours. And when I die, which won't be long now, you'll have the standing to ensure this company remembers what it was supposed to be. He'll fight me. Let him. You have the law on your side. And Clara, you have something else he doesn't. What? You actually care about the patients, about the ethics, about doing right instead of just doing well. That matters. That's power he can't buy or inherit. Owen stood slowly, each movement deliberate. I'm telling you this now because you need to know what you're walking into. My will is final. I've revised it for the last time. 40% is yours. The authority is yours. Don't waste it being who he wants you to be. He moved toward the door, then paused. And Clara, I'm sorry for not seeing you sooner, for not protecting you from what my son became. Then he was gone, and Clara was left alone, with the weight of $100 billion empire settling onto shoulders that had learned to carry more than anyone noticed. She picked up her phone. Victor Brennan had responded to her email. Clara, of course I remember you. I'd be happy to speak with you confidentially. Call me at this number anytime. Clara dialed. Victor answered on the second ring. Clara, are you all right? I heard about your medical emergency. I survived, Clara said. But I need help understanding what comes next. Tell me what's going on. And Clara did. She told him about Owen's email, about the will provision, about Stefan's reaction to her death. She told him about 7 years of erasure and the moment she'd decided she was done disappearing. Victor listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Clara, do you want to stay married to him? The question was direct and inescapable. No, Clara said, and felt the truth of it settle through her. No, I don't. Then here's what we're going to do. We're going to build a legal framework that protects your interests, activates your fiduciary authority, and establishes clear boundaries. You have power you haven't been using. It's time to use it. He'll say I'm being vindictive, that I'm unstable after the medical trauma. Let him say whatever he wants. Legal power doesn't require anyone's permission, Clara. It just requires activation, and you're about to activate everything you've been sitting on for 7 years. Clara felt something she hadn't felt in so long she'd almost forgotten the shape of it. Hope. Not hope that Stefan would change. Not hope that the marriage could be saved. Hope that she could save herself. Walk me through it, she said. Tell me what I need to do. Victor did. For the next 40 minutes, he outlined strategy, legal rights, fiduciary authority, the ways Clara could request financial audits, board briefings, compliance reviews, the ways she could activate dormant power that had been hers all along. You've been operating as though you have no authority, Victor said. But that was a choice, not a legal reality. Time to make a different choice. When Clara ended the call, she felt different, clearer, solid in a way she hadn't felt since before she'd said, I do, to a man who'd spent 7 years teaching her how to say nothing at all. She was being discharged the next day. Stefan had arranged for a car service to bring her home. He wouldn't be there. Another meeting he couldn't miss. Clara didn't mind. She needed the space, needed time to think, to plan, to become the woman Owen believed she could be, the woman she'd been before devotion had taught her to disappear. Ruth came by that evening for her final check before Clara's discharge. You look different, Ruth said, smiling. Stronger. I feel different, Clara admitted. Like I'd died and someone else came back. Maybe that's exactly what happened. Ruth squeezed her hand. Whatever you're about to do, Clara, whatever decision you're making, trust yourself. You know what's right. You've always known. You just stopped listening. I'm done being quiet, Clara said. Good. The world needs less quiet women and more women who know their worth. After Ruth left, Clara packed the few belongings she'd accumulated during her hospital stay. Tomorrow she'd return to the Thompson estate, to the life she'd built around someone else's needs. But she was returning different. Armed with information Stefan thought she didn't have, holding power he didn't know existed. And finally ready to stop making herself smaller for a man who'd celebrated when he thought she was gone. Clara Morrison Thompson had learned how to disappear. Now she was going to learn how to be undeniable. And the man who'd thought her death was convenient was about to discover that her survival was going to cost him everything he'd taken for granted. The information asymmetry was complete. The power shift had begun. And Clara was done being invisible. The car service dropped Clara at the Thompson estate entrance at 3 in the afternoon. The driver helped her with her bag, asked if she needed assistance to the door. She thanked him and said she could manage. She stood for a moment looking at the house she'd lived in for 7 years. 14,000 square feet of limestone and glass, professionally decorated, immaculately maintained. It had never felt like home. just a stage where she'd performed the role of devoted wife to an audience that had stopped watching. The house manager, Patricia, opened the door before Clara reached it. "Mrs. Thompson, welcome back. We've prepared the main bedroom for you. Is there anything you need?" Clara paused. The main bedroom, the one she'd shared with Stefan, where he'd come to bed later and later, where intimacy had died so gradually she hadn't noticed until it was already a memory. "Actually, Patricia, I'd like to stay in the East Guest Suite. Better for recovery. I don't want to disturb Mr. Thompson's sleep with medical needs." Patricia's expression remained professionally neutral, but Clara caught the flicker of understanding. "Of course. I'll have your things moved." "Thank you." Clara climbed the stairs slowly, still weak from the hospital stay, and walked to the east wing. The guest suite was smaller, simpler. A bedroom, bathroom, and sitting area, decorated in soft grays and blues, impersonal. Perfect. She sat on the bed and looked around the space that would become her staging area. Physical separation from Stefan wasn't divorce, wasn't even confrontation. It was just practical medical recovery, but it was also the first boundary she'd set in 7 years. And boundaries, Clara was learning, were the architecture of selfhood. Her phone rang. "Stefan." "Clara, I heard you were discharged. I'm sorry I couldn't be there. How are you feeling?" His voice carried the right notes of concern. If she hadn't heard what relief sounded like when he thought she was dead, she might have believed it. "Imagine. Patricia got me settled." "Good. I should be home by 8. We can have dinner together." Clara looked at the door to her new space, her separate space. "Actually, I'm exhausted. I think I'll just rest tonight, but thank you." A pause, brief but present. "Oh, all right. Tomorrow then. We should talk about your recovery plan, what you need." "Tomorrow," Clara agreed, and ended the call. She didn't owe him her evening, didn't owe him her energy, didn't owe him the performance of grateful invalid wife, blessed by his attention. The realization was quietly revolutionary. Clara opened her laptop and began reading. Owen's email had mentioned fiduciary authority over ethical compliance divisions. She needed to understand what that meant in practical terms. The Thompson family trust documents were dense, legal, structured in the careful language of estate planning designed to outlast generations. But Clara had a doctorate in bioethics. She knew how to read complex documents. She knew how to find the power buried in footnotes. And there it was, Section 7, Subsection C. Upon the death of the grantor, Clara Morrison Thompson would hold irrevocable authority over all patient advocacy programs, drug pricing ethics boards, research transparency initiatives, and charitable medical foundations operating under the Thompson Pharma umbrella. She would have voting rights on the primary board equal to the primary heir. She would have veto power over any corporate restructuring that materially affected patient access to essential medications. 40% of assets, billions of dollars, institutional power. And Stefan had no idea. Clara opened a new document and began making notes. Questions for Victor Brennan. Areas that needed clarification. Legal boundaries she needed to understand before Owen died, and everything became operational. Because Owen was dying. Everyone knew it. The only question was when. And when that happened, Clara needed to be ready. She worked until her eyes blurred with exhaustion, until the medical fatigue overwhelmed the adrenaline of strategy. Then she slept in her separate room, in her separate space, and didn't dream of Stefan at all. The next morning, Clara woke to silence. No Stefan preparing for work in the next room. No performative domesticity, just quiet. She showered, dressed in comfortable clothes that weren't chosen to please anyone, and went downstairs to find coffee. Stefan was in the breakfast room, reading the financial section on his tablet. He looked up when she entered. "You look better. How did you sleep?" "Well, actually." He smiled. "Good. I was thinking maybe we should plan a weekend away once you're stronger, somewhere quiet. We could both use the reset." Clara poured coffee, took her time answering. "I appreciate the thought, but I think I need to focus on recovery for now. Maybe later." Stefan's smile tightened slightly. Of course, no pressure. But there was pressure in the offer. Pressure to return to normal, to the marriage script they'd been performing. Pressure to forgive his 4-hour absence, his convenient relief, his careful calculations while she lay revived and alone. Clara wasn't ready to forgive. Wasn't sure she ever would be. "I have a few calls to make today," she said. "Medical follow-ups, that kind of thing." "Do you need help with anything? I can move some meetings." "No, I can manage, but thank you." She left the breakfast room with her coffee and returned to the east wing. to her space, away from the weight of his watching, his calculating, his careful performance of concern. In her sitting room, Clara called Victor Brennan. "Clara, how are you feeling?" "Stronger. I've been reading the trust documents. I have questions." "Good. Ask them." They spent an hour going through the legal framework. Victor explained that as a designated beneficiary with fiduciary authority, Clara had rights that existed independent of Owen's death. She could request transparency reports. She could audit foundation expenditures. She could attend board meetings as an observer. "The power is dormant until Owen passes," Victor explained. "But your right to information isn't. You can activate your oversight role now." "What if Stefan objects?" "He can object all he wants. The trust structure is irrevocable. Owen set this up specifically to create checks on Stefan's authority. Your role isn't optional or conditional. It's legally mandated." Clara felt something settle in her chest. Certainty. "Then I want to activate it. I want financial reports from the Thompson Foundation. I want to understand where the money is going." "I'll draft the formal request. As your attorney, I'll submit it to the trust administrator. They're legally obligated to comply." "How long will it take?" 2 weeks, maybe less. Clara, be prepared. When you do this, Stefan will know you're not staying silent anymore." "Good," Clara said. "I want him to know." After the call, Clara sat with the quiet satisfaction of a decision made. For 7 years, she'd been passive, accommodating, invisible. Not anymore. She opened her email and found a message from Dr. Amara Singh, a colleague from her bioethics days. They'd published together once, years ago, before Clara had stopped publishing altogether. "Clara, I heard about your medical emergency. I'm so relieved you're recovering. I wanted to reach out because I'm leading a congressional advisory panel on pharmaceutical pricing transparency, and you're early. Work on profit ethics frameworks keeps coming up. Would you consider consulting? It's unpaid and advisory only, but your perspective would be invaluable. No pressure, just wanted you to know the door is open." Clara read it twice. Her work, her research, the career she'd abandoned to support Stefan's ambitions. Someone remembered it. Someone valued it. Clara hit reply. "Amara, thank you for reaching out. I would be honored to consult on the panel. When do you need me?" She hit send before she could second guess, before she could calculate how Stefan might react, before she could prioritize his convenience over her own resurrection. The response came back within an hour. "Clara, that's wonderful. First session is in 3 weeks. Virtual participation is fine if you're still recovering. I'll send details. So glad to have you back." Back, as though Clara had been somewhere and was returning. In a way, she had been. She'd been nowhere, occupying negative space, existing only in relation to Stefan's needs. Now she was coming back. To herself. Over the next week, Clara moved through the estate like a ghost, relearning how to be solid. She rested, recovered, regained strength. She also began quietly reclaiming pieces of her life. She called her parents, who she'd kept at careful distance for years because their worry and questions made her defensive. Her mother answered on the second ring. "Clara? Sweetheart, how are you? We heard about the surgery." Heard, not from Clara, who hadn't called them herself, probably from Patricia or hospital records, or the distant family network that functioned without her input. "I'm okay, Mom. I'm recovering. We wanted to come see you, but Stefan said you needed quiet." Of course he had. Stefan had managed her crisis the way he managed everything, controlling access, controlling narrative. "I'd love to see you," Clara said. "Could you come this weekend?" Her mother's surprise was audible. "Really? Are you sure you're up for it?" "I'm sure. I've missed you." It was true. She'd missed them, had missed the people who loved her without calculation, who wanted nothing from her except her presence. "We'll be there Saturday," her mother said, voice thick with relief. When Saturday came, Clara's parents arrived with flowers and worry and the kind of love that didn't require performance. They sat in the garden while Clara told them a version of the truth, that she'd nearly died, that it had clarified things, that she was making changes. Her father, a retired professor who'd always been too perceptive, asked the question Clara had been waiting for. "Where's Stefan?" "Business trip," Clara said, which was true. Stefan had left Friday for meetings in New York, wouldn't be back until Monday. "He left you alone while you're recovering?" Clara met her father's eyes. "Yes." Her mother reached for her hand. "Clara, are you happy?" The question sat heavy between them. I'm working on it, Clara said finally. I'm figuring out what happy looks like. Her mother squeezed her hand. You know we love you, right? Whatever you need, whatever you decide, we're here. The permission implicit in those words made Clara's throat tight. Permission to choose herself. Permission to admit the marriage was broken. Permission to stop pretending. I know, Mom. Thank you. After they left, Clara sat in the garden alone and felt the foundation of her old life continuing to crack. Not catastrophically, just steadily, inevitably, the way structures fail when the weight becomes unsustainable. She was done carrying weight that wasn't hers. 2 weeks after Clara activated her fiduciary oversight request, a package arrived by courier. Financial reports from the Thompson Foundation spanning the last 3 years. Expenditures, vendor contracts, program allocations. Clara spent 2 days reading them, and what she found made her cold with understanding. The foundation was supposed to fund patient access programs, medication assistance for low-income families, research grants for rare disease treatment, community health initiatives, and it did fund those things. But it also funded something else, vendor contracts with companies that, when Clara traced the ownership structures, led back to entities partially owned by Vanessa Cole. Consulting fees that seemed disproportionate to services rendered. Restructuring expenses that looked designed to shift assets away from patient-facing programs and into administrative overhead. Someone was using the foundation as a personal fund, and that someone had Stefan's signature on the approval documents. Clara photographed every page, uploaded them to a secure cloud drive, and sent a summary to Victor Brennan. His response was immediate. This is problematic, potentially legally actionable. Don't confront Stefan directly. Let me review with a forensic accountant. We need documentation before we move. But Clara had already made a decision. She wasn't going to confront Stefan. Not yet. Confrontation would give him time to cover tracks, to reframe, to spin. She was going to wait, gather information, build an unassailable case. And when the time came, when Owen died and her authority became operational, she would dismantle everything Stefan had built on the foundation's back. Not out of revenge, out of principle. The patients this foundation was supposed to serve deserved better than being a vehicle for corporate enrichment. 3 weeks after her discharge, Clara attended her first session with Dr. Amara Singh's Congressional Advisory Panel. It was virtual, which meant she could participate from the privacy of her sitting room, camera on, fully present. The panel was discussing pharmaceutical price transparency models, the ethics of patent evergreening, the balance between profit incentive and patient access. Clara had forgotten how much she loved this work. The intellectual rigor, the moral clarity, the belief that systems could be better if people cared enough to fight for better. When Amara called on her for input, Clara spoke without hesitation. The fundamental issue is that we've structured pharmaceutical development around profit maximization rather than human need. Patent protections exist to incentivize innovation, but they've been weaponized to create artificial scarcity. We need frameworks that reward innovation while preventing exploitation. Another panelist, a healthcare economist, pushed back. But without profit incentive, companies won't invest in research. I'm not suggesting elimination of profit, Clara responded. I'm suggesting ethical boundaries. Profit that doesn't come at the cost of people dying because they can't afford insulin. Profit that doesn't prioritize shareholder return over patient survival. The discussion continued, rigorous and challenging, and Clara felt alive in a way she hadn't in years. When the session ended, Amara stayed on the call. Clara, that was excellent. I've missed your voice in these conversations. I've missed having these conversations. Why did you stop? You were publishing cutting-edge work, and then you just disappeared. Clara could have offered a diplomatic answer, could have blamed timing or priorities or personal circumstances. Instead, she told the truth. I got married to someone who needed me invisible, and I complied. Amara was quiet for a moment. But you're not invisible anymore. No, Clara said. I'm not. Good. The field needs you. And Clara, whatever you're walking through right now, I'm here if you need support. After the call, Clara sat with the unfamiliar feeling of professional competence remembered. She'd been good at this work. She could be good at it again. She wasn't just Stefan's wife. She was Dr. Clara Morrison Thompson, bioethicist, researcher, someone with a voice that mattered in spaces that had nothing to do with her husband's empire. Reclaiming that identity felt like learning to breathe after years of holding her breath. When Stefan returned from New York, he found Clara in her sitting room, working on notes for the next panel session. You seem busy, he said from the doorway. Clara looked up. I am. I joined a congressional advisory panel on drug pricing ethics. She watched his expression shift. Surprise, then something else. Calculation. A congressional panel? Clara, you didn't mention this. I didn't think I needed permission. It's not about permission. It's about we should discuss these things. This could create conflicts of interest with Thompson Pharma. Clara set down her pen. I'm not employed by Thompson Pharma. I volunteer on the foundation board. My professional work is separate. The optics, Clara. The optics of what? Of me having a career? Of me doing work that matters? Stefan stepped into the room, his voice careful. I'm not saying you can't work. I'm saying we should coordinate, make sure there aren't complications. Complications for who? For both of us, for the family. Clara, you're recovering from a major medical event. Maybe this isn't the right time to take on additional stress. And there it was, the reframe. Her professional resurrection positioned as stress, as something to be managed, as a problem rather than a reclamation. Clara stood, met his eyes. I've spent 7 years managing my life around your schedule, your needs, your career. I'm done doing that. Stefan stared at her. What's gotten into you? Clarity, Clara said. I nearly died, Stefan, and it clarified a lot of things. You're not yourself. No, Clara agreed. I'm finally myself. I haven't been myself since I married you. The words sat between them, sharp and irreversible. Stefan's jaw tightened. This isn't fair. I've been supportive. I've given you everything. You've given me a house and a credit card. You haven't given me attention or partnership or love. You stopped seeing me years ago. That's not true. When's my birthday, Stefan? He blinked. What? My birthday. When is it? The pause was damning. Clara, this is ridiculous. You don't know. You don't know when my birthday is because you've never cared enough to remember. That's not a marriage. That's me performing devotion to someone who experiences me as furniture. Stefan's expression shifted to something colder. If you're so unhappy, why did you stay? Because I loved you. Because I thought if I was patient enough, supportive enough, you'd eventually see me. And now? Clara felt the truth settle through her, calm and final. Now I know you're not capable of seeing me, and I'm done trying to earn something you'll never give. She walked past him, out of the sitting room, leaving him standing alone with the reality that his invisible wife had become unavailable. The confrontation didn't lead to more conversation. It led to more distance. Stefan stopped trying to have dinner with her, stopped asking about her recovery. They moved through the estate like planets in separate orbits, occupying the same space without ever truly intersecting. Clara didn't mind. Distance was better than the performance of intimacy. She focused on her work. The advisory panel sessions became weekly anchors. She started writing again, drafting a paper on fiduciary ethics in pharmaceutical foundations. She reconnected with old colleagues, rebuilt professional networks she'd abandoned. And she waited. Owen's health continued its inexorable decline. He was in hospice care now, at home, surrounded by medical staff and the quiet machinery of a life winding down. Clara visited him twice. Stefan didn't know about the visits, didn't know that his father had chosen Clara's presence over his during the final weeks. On her last visit, Owen was barely conscious, but he squeezed her hand when she sat beside him. Use it, he whispered. The power. Don't waste it being quiet. I won't, Clara promised. I'm done being quiet. Owen's smile was faint but real. Good, you're stronger than he ever understood. 3 days later, Owen Thompson died. Clara was at the estate when she got the call from Owen's hospice nurse. Stefan was en route from a business trip, racing to arrive in time, but the timing had betrayed him again. Just like the day Clara nearly died, Stefan was somewhere else when death arrived. Clara went to the house where Owen had spent his final days. She sat with his body for 20 minutes before Stefan arrived. 20 minutes where she said goodbye to the man who'd given her the tools to save herself. When Stefan burst through the door, face tight with something between grief and frustration, he stopped short seeing Clara there. You were here? He asked me to come, yesterday. Stefan looked at his father's still form, and Clara saw it again. Not overwhelming grief, just the cold awareness that the waiting was over. The empire was in play now, and Stefan thought he'd won. The will reading was scheduled for 48 hours after Owen's death, per his explicit instructions. It would take place at Thompson Pharma headquarters, in the executive boardroom, with the full board of directors present. Howard Marsh, the family estate attorney, had insisted on the public reading. Owen had wanted it that way, wanted witnesses to the power transfer, wanted no ambiguity about his final wishes. Clara dressed carefully that morning, a charcoal suit, professional and severe. She wasn't performing widow. She was performing authority. Victor Brennan met her in the parking garage before the reading. "Are you ready?" "I don't know," Clara admitted. "This is going to change everything. It already changed the moment you decided to stop being invisible. This is just making it official." They rode the elevator to the executive floor together. Victor would sit beside her during the reading, her attorney, her advocate, her evidence that she wasn't walking into this alone. The boardroom was full when they arrived. 16 board members, senior executives, family attorney Howard Marsh, and Stefan, sitting at the head of the table like he already owned it. His eyes tracked Clara as she entered with Victor. Confusion flickered across his face. Why did she need an attorney? Clara sat across from him, met his gaze without flinching, and waited. Howard Marsh called the room to order. "Thank you all for being here. Owen Thompson's last will and testament is comprehensive, and he requested this public reading to ensure transparency and clarity. I'll read the relevant sections in full." The preliminaries were standard. Charitable bequests to hospitals, research institutions, disease foundations, small bequests to long-term staff members, the distribution of personal property. Then Howard reached the core. The disposition of the Thompson Family Trust, currently valued at approximately $103 billion, is structured as follows. The room went silent. 35% of all assets, including controlling stock in Thompson Pharma, liquid investments, and real property portfolio A, are designated to Stefan James Thompson as primary heir. Stefan's expression was controlled, but Clara saw satisfaction in his eyes. 35% of $100 billion. It was vast. It was power. But it wasn't everything. Howard continued. 15% is distributed among the following charitable trusts and family bequests, detailed in Appendix C. More reading, more distributions. The room waited. 10% is held in irrevocable operational trusts for executive continuity, employee profit sharing, and long-term research funding. 40% allocated. The board members were calculating, trying to account for the remaining 60. Howard looked directly at Clara. 40% of all assets, including fiduciary authority over all ethical compliance divisions, patient advocacy programs, pharmaceutical pricing oversight boards, and philanthropic allocations, is designated to Clara Morrison Thompson. The silence was absolute. Additionally, Clara Morrison Thompson is granted voting rights on the Thompson Pharma Board of Directors equal to those of the primary heir, veto authority over any corporate restructuring that materially affects patient access to essential medications or alters the ethical mission of patient-facing programs, and permanent seat on all committees governing drug pricing, research ethics, and charitable foundation operations. Stefan's face had gone white. Clara kept her expression neutral, but her heart was pounding so hard she thought everyone could hear it. One of the board members, Gerald Hutchins, spoke up. "I'm sorry, Howard, but can you clarify? 40% outright, or held in some kind of restricted trust?" Irrevocable trust, with Clara Morrison Thompson as the sole trustee and beneficiary. She has complete discretionary authority over those assets and the programs designated to her oversight. The trust structure exists for tax and legal protection purposes, but functionally, the 40% is hers. Stefan found his voice. There must be a mistake. Howard Marsh looked at him with the patience of someone who'd been expecting this reaction. "There is no mistake, Stefan. This provision was added to your father's will 2 years ago and reaffirmed in his final revision 6 months ago. It is comprehensive, legally sound, and irrevocable. I want to see the document. You'll receive a full copy, as will all primary beneficiaries, but the reading is not complete." Howard looked back at his papers. Owen Thompson included a personal letter to be read at this time. It's addressed to the board. He cleared his throat and began reading. To the Board of Directors of Thompson Pharma, I built this company on the principle that pharmaceutical innovation should serve human need, not just shareholder profit. Over the years, market pressures and legacy expectations have threatened that principle. I do not trust that principle to survive without structural protection. Therefore, I have designated Clara Morrison Thompson, a trained bioethicist with expertise in patient-centered care models, as the guardian of this company's ethical foundation. Her authority is not ceremonial. It is absolute in all matters touching patient welfare, drug accessibility, and research integrity. Stefan is a capable businessman and a legitimate heir, but business capability without moral restraint builds empires that harm people. Clara provides the restraint, the check, the conscience. This is not a judgment against Stefan. It is a protection for the patients we serve and a preservation of the mission that mattered when I started this company. The structure is final. Work together or work against each other, but the power distribution stands. The letter ended. The room sat in stunned silence. Stefan stood abruptly. I need to speak with Howard privately. Howard nodded. We can take a 15-minute recess. Stefan gestured sharply to Clara. You too, now. They moved to a smaller conference room. Stefan, Clara, Howard, and Victor. The door closed. Stefan turned on Clara, control fracturing. How long have you known about this? Clara met his eyes. Owen told me while I was in the hospital. While you were, he visited you? Yes. And you didn't think to mention that my father was rewriting the will to give you 40% of the estate. He didn't rewrite it. The provision was already there. He just told me it existed. Stefan looked at Howard. This can be contested. She manipulated him, exploited his illness. Howard's expression was granite. Stefan, the provision predates Clara's medical emergency by 18 months. There is no basis for claiming undue influence. Your father was mentally competent. The will was reviewed by multiple attorneys, and his reasoning is documented. What reasoning? That I can't be trusted. That unchecked authority leads to ethical compromise. Your father believed Clara would ensure the company's mission integrity. Stefan's voice dropped. Dangerous. She has no experience running a company. She's a researcher. She doesn't understand corporate strategy, market dynamics, shareholder expectations. She doesn't need to, Howard said calmly. Her role is oversight, not operations. You run the company. She ensures it serves the patients it was designed to help. Stefan turned back to Clara, and she saw something new in his eyes. Not just calculation now. Fear. You planned this. You and my father. No, Clara said quietly. Owen planned this. I didn't ask for it. I didn't even know about it until I'd already survived dying. Survived dying, Stefan repeated, voice bitter. Is that what we're calling it now? You had a medical emergency and turned it into a power grab. I didn't grab anything. Your father gave this to me because he didn't trust you to hold it alone. The truth of it landed like a blow. You have no right, Stefan said, voice shaking. I have legal right. I have fiduciary right. And Stefan, I have moral right because I've seen what you've been doing with the foundation funds. His expression shuddered. What are you talking about? Clara pulled out her phone, opened the financial summary she'd photographed. Vendor contracts to companies Vanessa Cole has ownership stakes in, consulting fees that don't match services, asset restructuring designed to move money away from patient programs. I activated my fiduciary oversight 3 weeks ago. I've seen the books. Stefan's face went pale. You had no authority to request those documents. I had every authority. As a designated beneficiary with oversight responsibility, I'm entitled to full financial transparency, and what I found is borderline embezzlement from a charitable foundation. Victor stepped forward. Stefan, I'd advise you not to say anything else without your own attorney present. Stefan looked between Clara and Victor, realization settling. You've been planning this since the hospital. No, Clara said. I've been protecting myself. There's a difference. This isn't over. Yes, Clara said, voice calm and final. It is. You can contest the will if you want, but Victor has already prepared our defense, and it includes documentation of the foundation irregularities, a timeline of your reaction to my clinical death, and testimony from hospital staff about your delayed response. Do you really want all of that to become public record? The threat was clear. Stefan could fight, but fighting would expose everything he tried to hide. Who are you? He asked, and he sounded genuinely confused. I'm the woman you stopped seeing 7 years ago. I'm just visible again. She walked out of the conference room, Victor beside her, leaving Stefan standing with the wreckage of assumptions he'd built his future on. They returned to the boardroom. The board members looked between Clara and Stefan, trying to understand the new power architecture. Howard Marsh concluded the reading, confirmed that all parties would receive full documentation, and adjourned the meeting. As people filed out, several board members approached Clara. Introductions, carefully worded welcomes. They didn't know what to make of her yet, but they recognized power when the will granted it. Clara shook hands, accepted condolences on Owen's death, and didn't perform humility. She belonged here now. The law said so. Gerald Hutchins, the most senior board member, lingered after the others left. Mrs. Thompson, I won't pretend this isn't surprising, but Owen was deliberate about everything. If he gave you this authority, he had reasons. He did, Clara said, and I intend to honor them. The board will expect you to attend meetings regularly, to be active in your oversight role. I will be. Gerald nodded slowly. Good. We need voices willing to ask hard questions about patient access. Too many compromises have been made in the name of profit. After he left, Clara and Victor stood alone in the boardroom. You did well, Victor said. I feel like I'm going to be sick. That's normal. You just publicly claimed power from a man who thought you'd stay silent forever. Your nervous system is catching up. Clara sat down, legs shaky. He's going to make this ugly. Probably, but Clara, you have the law on your side. The will is ironclad. His options are limited. He'll try anyway. Let him try. You're not the woman he married anymore, and he's about to learn that the hard way. That evening, Clara returned to the Thompson estate. She half expected Stefan to be there, ready for another confrontation. Instead, the house was empty. Patricia found her in the kitchen. Mr. Thompson called. He said he's staying at the corporate apartment for the foreseeable future. The corporate apartment? The one Clara had seen referenced in his text messages to Vanessa. Thank you for letting me know, Patricia. Mrs. Thompson, if I may, the staff we're here if you need anything. Clara looked at Patricia, who'd managed this household for 12 years, who'd watched Clara disappear into the role of invisible wife, who was now watching her come back. Thank you, I appreciate that. Alone in the massive estate, Clara should have felt lonely. Instead, she felt light. Stefan had removed himself, created distance, given her the space to think without his presence, his pressure, his performance of a marriage that had been dead longer than she'd been willing to admit. Clara went to the main bedroom, the one she'd shared with him, and began gathering her things. Not his things, just hers. Clothes, books, personal items. She carried them to the East Wing guest suite and arranged them properly. Claimed the space fully. Then she called a locksmith. I'd like to change the locks on the East Wing, just that section. Can you come tomorrow? The locksmith confirmed the appointment. Clara wasn't locking Stefan out of the house, just out of her space. Her reclaimed, separate, sovereign space. It was a small boundary. But boundaries accumulated. They built structures. And Clara was building a structure that didn't include access to her anymore. Over the next week, Clara moved through a new routine. She attended her first official Thompson Pharma board meeting, sat at the table with her nameplate, listened to operations reports, financial projections, strategy proposals. When the discussion turned to a proposed restructuring that would consolidate patient assistance programs to reduce administrative costs, Clara spoke for the first time. Can someone explain how this consolidation affects patient access? The proposal mentions cost savings, but what's the impact on the actual families receiving assistance? The CFO, Martin Dresden, looked uncomfortable. The access levels remain the same. We're just streamlining operations. Streamlining usually means cutting. What specifically is being cut? Martin glanced at Stefan, who sat at the opposite end of the table, expression neutral. Some regional offices will close. Applications will be processed centrally. And response time for urgent medication needs. There may be slight delays during the transition. Clara looked at the proposal again. Slight delays for someone rationing insulin because they can't afford it isn't slight. It's life-threatening. I'm vetoing this restructuring until we have a plan that doesn't compromise patient access during transition. The room went quiet. Gerald Hutchins cleared his throat. Clara raises a valid concern. Can we table this until operations develops a revised proposal? Martin nodded tightly. We can revise. The meeting continued, but the power dynamic had shifted. Clara's veto authority wasn't theoretical. It was operational, and she would use it. After the meeting, Stefan caught up to her in the hallway. That was unnecessary. You made Martin look incompetent in front of the board. Clara stopped walking. I asked questions about patient impact. If that made him look incompetent, maybe the proposal was incomplete. You're going to make enemies if you challenge every decision. I'm not here to make friends, Stefan. I'm here to make sure this company doesn't prioritize profit over the people it's supposed to serve. That's naive. We can't run a business on idealism. We can run a business ethically, Your father believed that. It's why he gave me this authority. Stefan stepped closer, voice low. He gave you that authority because you manipulated him when he was dying. Clara didn't flinch. If you believe that, contest the will. Take me to court. Let's make all of this public. They stood in the corporate hallway, in the building that bore his family name, and Stefan had nothing to say, because they both knew what public scrutiny would reveal. The foundation irregularities, Vanessa Cole's conflicts of interest, his 4-hour absence the day his wife nearly died. Clara had information he couldn't afford to have exposed. And information wielded correctly was absolute power. This isn't over, Stefan said finally. Yes, it is, Clara replied. You just haven't accepted it yet. She walked away, leaving him standing alone in the hallway of the empire he'd thought was his birthright. The months that followed Owen's death were a masterclass in strategic patience. Clara didn't dismantle Stefan's world overnight. She didn't have to. She simply used the authority Owen had given her and watched the empire shift around her choices. Every restructuring proposal that prioritized profit over patience, she vetoed. Every vendor contract with questionable ownership structures, she audited. Every attempt to reduce transparency or limit patient access, she blocked with the calm, immovable authority of someone who finally understood her own power. The board learned quickly. If a proposal affected patient welfare, Clara Thompson's approval was non-negotiable. And Clara Thompson asked questions that required honest answers. Stefan tried to work around her, tried to frame decisions in ways that avoided her oversight. But the will had been comprehensive. Owen had known his son would try to circumvent the constraints, and he'd built the structure to prevent it. After 6 months of vetoed proposals and blocked restructuring attempts, Stefan requested a private meeting. They met in a neutral conference room at Thompson Pharma headquarters, Stefan, Clara, and their respective attorneys. No board members, no witnesses beyond legal counsel. Stefan looked diminished somehow. Still handsome, still polished, but the certainty he'd always carried had eroded. This isn't sustainable, he said without preamble. We can't run a company if you veto every strategic decision. But I don't veto every decision, Clara replied calmly. I veto decisions that harm patients for profit. There's a difference. You're operating on idealism. Business requires pragmatism. Business requires ethics. Your father understood that. It's why I'm here. Stefan's jaw tightened. What do you want, Clara? What's it going to take for you to step back? I'm not stepping back. I'm doing exactly what Owen empowered me to do. He empowered you to destroy everything I've worked for. Clara leaned forward slightly. No, Stefan. He empowered me to save everything you were willing to destroy for market share. There's a difference. I want to buy you out. The offer sat on the table like a grenade. Victor started to speak, but Clara raised a hand. My trust is irrevocable. You can't buy me out. Everything has a price. Not this. Owen didn't give me this authority so I could sell it back to you. He gave it to me to protect patients from exactly the kind of thinking that suggests patient welfare is for sale. Stefan stood, agitated. You're doing this to punish me, for the marriage, for how things ended. Clara remained seated, looked up at him with genuine calm. I'm doing this because it's right. You've made this about us, about punishment and revenge, but Stefan, I don't think about you anymore. I think about the patients who can't afford insulin because of patent manipulation. I think about the families bankrupted by medication costs. I think about the mission your father built this company to serve. You're not even part of the equation. The words landed with devastating finality. Stefan's attorney, David Reich, cleared his throat. Perhaps we should explore compromise positions. I'm open to compromise on operations, Clara said. I've never tried to run the company. That's Stefan's role. But I won't compromise on patient access, pricing ethics, or transparency. Those aren't negotiable. The meeting ended without resolution because there was no resolution available. The power structure was set. Clara held veto authority over everything that mattered to the company's ethical foundation, and she was going to use it. Stefan would have to learn to operate within boundaries, or he'd spend the rest of his career fighting a losing battle against a will he couldn't break, and a woman he'd taught to be invisible, but who had learned to be unavoidable. 3 weeks later, Clara received divorce papers by courier. Victor reviewed them in her sitting room. He's filing on grounds of irreconcilable differences. The asset division proposal is interesting. How so? He's not contesting your trust inheritance. He can't. but he's trying to claim the Thompson estate as his separate property, arguing it was a family asset prior to marriage. It was, Clara said. I don't want the estate. Victor looked up. You sure? It's worth $40 million. I'm sure. I don't want to live here. It's never been home. Where will you go? Clara smiled. I've been looking at apartments, something smaller, something mine. Clara, you're entitled to contest this, to fight for more. I don't need more, Victor. I have $40 billion in trust. I have professional work I care about. I have authority to protect patients from predatory pricing. I don't need Stefan's house. Victor nodded slowly. All right, I'll file our response accepting the basic terms. Anything you want to add? Yes, I want an ironclad non-disclosure agreement. He doesn't get to talk about me publicly, privately, or professionally. I want complete separation. Done. The divorce proceedings moved quickly after that. Stefan wanted it finalized. Clara didn't contest. Within 4 months, it was done. Clara Morrison Thompson kept her married name, not out of attachment, but because the professional work she was rebuilding existed under that name now. She'd reclaimed it. It was hers. She moved into a 3-bedroom apartment in the city, smaller than the estate, but filled with light and books and space that belonged only to her. She decorated it herself. No designer, no performance of wealth, just Clara's taste, Clara's choices, Clara's life. Daniel Reeves, the legal ethics professor she'd met at a panel discussion, asked her to dinner, then to another dinner, then to a weekend lecture series they both wanted to attend. Clara went slowly, carefully. She was learning what it felt like to be wanted for who she was, not what she could provide. It was disorienting and wonderful and sometimes overwhelming. But Daniel was patient, and more importantly, Daniel saw her, asked about her work, listened when she talked, remembered her birthday. It wasn't love yet, but it was possibility, and possibility felt like resurrection. 14 months after Owen's death, the Thompson Foundation held its annual gala. It was the first major public event since the will reading, since Clara's authority became operational, since the corporate world started understanding that power at Thompson Pharma had fundamentally shifted. Clara attended, not as Stefan's wife, but as the Foundation's primary fiduciary authority. She wore deep emerald, elegant and severe. She walked in alone, not because she was isolated, but because she was sovereign. Daniel had offered to accompany her, but Clara had declined gently. This was her space to occupy on her own terms. The room noticed her entrance. Conversations paused. She was no longer the invisible wife who managed seating charts and smiled politely. She was the woman who controlled 40% of a pharmaceutical empire and wielded veto power over its ethical direction. Stefan was there with Vanessa Cole, who'd been positioned as a strategic partner now that the pretense of discretion was unnecessary. They stood near the bar, and Clara watched Stefan's expression when he saw her. Not longing, not regret. Just the resigned awareness of someone who'd lost a game he didn't know he was playing until it was over. Clara didn't approach him. Didn't need to. They existed in separate orbits now, connected only by corporate structure and legal obligation. Dr. Amara Singh found Clara near the silent auction tables. Clara, you look phenomenal. How are you? I'm well, really well. I heard about the veto on the patient assistance restructuring. The congressional committee was impressed. That took courage. It took reading the fine print, Clara said. The courage was Owen's, trusting me with the authority to use it. Still, a lot of people in your position would have taken the money and stayed quiet. Clara smiled. I spent 7 years staying quiet. I'm done with that. Later in the evening, Gerald Hutchins approached her. Clara, the board wanted me to discuss the upcoming strategic planning session. We'd like you to present on patient-centered care models. Your perspective would be valuable. It was an olive branch, an acknowledgement that she wasn't just an obstacle, but a resource. I'd be happy to, Clara said. Good. And Clara, for what it's worth, Owen made the right choice. The company needs your voice. After he walked away, Clara stood alone for a moment, looking around the room full of wealth and power and influence. A year ago, she would have been here performing the role of supportive wife, invisible and accommodating. Now she was here in her own authority, and the room had adjusted to her presence. The final moment came near the end of the evening. Stefan approached her, Vanessa conspicuously absent. Can we talk, just for a minute? Clara considered saying no. She didn't owe him her time, but curiosity won. All right. They stepped onto a quiet balcony overlooking the city. Stefan was silent for a moment, then spoke quietly. I underestimated you. For years, I underestimated you. Yes, you did. I didn't think you'd actually use the authority. I thought you'd defer the way you always did. Clara looked at him. This man she'd loved so completely it had nearly erased her. I deferred because I thought that's what love looked like. But Stefan, you never loved me. You loved my willingness to disappear. That's not fair. It's true, and the moment I stopped disappearing, you couldn't wait to be rid of me. Stefan looked out at the city. I wasn't a good husband. No, you weren't. For what it's worth, I am sorry for how I treated you, for the hospital, for all of it. Clara studied his profile. The apology sounded genuine. Maybe it even was. But it didn't change anything. I appreciate that, but I don't need your apology, Stefan. I needed you to see me 7 years ago. I needed you to value me when I was valuing you. I needed partnership and you gave me neglect. Your apology now doesn't fix what was broken then. Can we at least work together professionally, without all this hostility? There's no hostility on my end. There's just boundary. I'll do my job, you'll do yours, but we're not partners. We're colleagues with overlapping authority, that's all. Stefan nodded slowly. That's all I'll ever be to you now? A colleague? That's more than you made me, Clara said quietly. I was furniture to you. I was infrastructure. I'd rather be a colleague than invisible. She left him on the balcony and returned to the gala, to the room full of people who saw her now, who couldn't ignore her anymore. And for the first time in 7 years, Clara Morrison Thompson belonged entirely to herself. The power shift was complete. The reclamation finished. The boundaries set. Stefan had thought her death would free him. Instead, her survival had liberated her. And that liberation was the most devastating consequence he'd never seen coming. You know, I need to pause here, because what you just witnessed, what Clara just walked through, it's not just a story about inheritance or corporate power or marriage betrayal. It's about something much deeper, something that lives in the space between who we are and who we become when we love people who can't love us back. Clara spent 7 years making herself smaller, and here's what breaks my heart about that. She didn't do it because she was weak. She did it because she was devoted, because she believed that love meant accommodation, that being a good partner meant erasing your needs so the other person never had to consider them. And Stefan, he didn't have to be a villain for this to be devastating. He didn't have to scream or hit or overtly abuse. He just had to stop seeing her. He just had to let her devotion become invisible, let her service become expected, let her presence fade into background noise. That's the cruelty that doesn't leave bruises, emotional neglect, the slow, corrosive experience of giving everything and having it treated like nothing. Clara taught Stefan how to treat her. Every time she swallowed her hurt, every time she chose peace over truth, every time she prioritized his comfort over her dignity, she was teaching him that she would accept anything. And he learned perfectly. But here's what I need you to understand. Clara's transformation didn't start when she got power. It didn't start when Owen gave her 40% of an empire. It started when she decided to stop betraying herself for someone who'd already abandoned her. The money, the authority, the board seat, all of that was just confirmation of a choice she'd already made. The choice to be visible again, to matter, to stop performing devotion to someone who experienced it as obligation. You see, information asymmetry, knowing something the other person doesn't, it's only powerful if you're willing to use it. Clara could have learned that Stefan celebrated her death and still stayed, still performed the marriage, still made excuses, but she didn't. She chose clarity over comfort. She chose self-respect over the illusion of partnership. She chose herself. And that's the lesson I'm praying lands in your spirit today. Your dignity is not negotiable, not for love, not for security, not for the fear of starting over, not for the sunk cost of years already given. If someone can't see you, can't value you, can't honor your presence, your voice, your humanity, then they don't deserve access to you. Period. You are not a rehabilitation center for people who refuse to do their own healing. You are not a dumping ground for someone else's inability to love well. You are not a supporting character in someone else's story of ambition and advancement. You are the protagonist of your own life, and protagonists don't disappear. They don't shrink. They don't spend years making themselves digestible for people who aren't even tasting the meal. So here's what I'm praying for you right now. I'm praying that you find the courage to stop making yourself smaller for people who are threatened by your actual size. I'm praying that you recognize emotional neglect for what it is, not a phase, not a busy season, not something you can fix by being more understanding. It's a choice someone is making about how little of you they're willing to engage with. I'm praying for the strength to set boundaries even when it costs you comfort. Because comfort built on self-erasure isn't comfort. It's slow death with nice furniture. I'm praying that whatever almost killed you, physically, emotionally, spiritually, becomes the thing that wakes you up to your own worth. I'm praying for information asymmetry in your favor, that you see clearly what others think is hidden, that you understand dynamics people believe you're too naive to recognize, and that you use that clarity to protect yourself. I'm praying that you stop waiting for people to see you and start seeing yourself, because the moment you truly see your own value, other people's blindness stops defining you. I'm praying for the wisdom to know that devotion without reciprocity isn't love. It's self-destruction with a romantic soundtrack. I'm praying that you build a life where your presence isn't conditional, your voice isn't negotiable, and your identity doesn't require anyone's permission to exist. And I'm praying that you learn what Clara learned, that surviving isn't the same as living, that you can have a heartbeat and still be dying inside, and that real resurrection happens when you choose yourself after years of choosing everyone else. You deserve to be seen, fully, without apology, without performing palatability, without shrinking to fit someone else's limited capacity. And if the people in your life can't handle the full, unedited, powerful version of you, they don't deserve the preview, the edited version, or the memory. Clara didn't need Stefan to change. She needed herself to change. To remember that devotion to someone else should never cost you devotion to yourself. That's the real inheritance. Not the money, not the power. The choice to reclaim the parts of yourself you traded for a love that was never real. So I'm asking you today, what are you trading? What parts of yourself are you keeping small because you're afraid of being too much? What silence are you maintaining to keep a peace that's really just slow erosion? And here's the harder question. What would happen if you stopped? I'll tell you what would happen. You'd find out who actually loves you, and who just loved your willingness to disappear. And that knowledge, painful as it is the beginning of freedom. You are not too much. You have never been too much. You've just been surrounded by people with too little capacity. And you don't fix that by getting smaller. You fix it by finding bigger spaces. Breathe deeply, friend. You've survived worse than the truth. And on the other side of that truth is a version of you that doesn't need permission to take up space. Let's see Clara walk into that freedom completely. 18 months after Owen's death, Clara stood in the lobby of the Thompson Patient Advocacy Center and felt the full weight of what she'd built. The center occupied a renovated building in the medical district, 4 floors dedicated entirely to patient services. Free medication access programs for families who couldn't afford treatment. Independent drug efficacy research untethered from profit motive. A transparency watchdog that audited pharmaceutical pricing and published findings publicly. It was institutional compassion with her name attached. The opposite of invisible. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was scheduled for 2 in the afternoon. Press had gathered. Policymakers, patient advocacy groups. Dr. Amara Singh stood near the front, smiling with genuine pride. Clara's parents sat in the front row, her mother crying quietly, relieved and grateful in equal measure to see her daughter whole again. Ruth Morales, the ICU nurse who'd told Clara the truth when truth mattered most, stood off to the side. They'd stayed in touch, occasional coffee meetings that had evolved into genuine friendship. Daniel was there too, in the 3rd row, supportive but not possessive. They'd been dating for 8 months now, carefully and honestly. He knew her story, knew what she'd survived, knew not to ask her to be anything other than exactly who she was. Stefan was not there. He hadn't been invited. He still ran Thompson Pharma, still commanded his 35%, still made strategic decisions. But he operated within the ethical frameworks Clara enforced. Every major decision that touched patient access, drug pricing, or research integrity crossed her desk. She had veto authority, and she used it. Not punitively, not emotionally, just ethically. Their interactions were professional, distant, procedural. He tried multiple times to soften the boundaries, to suggest collaborative projects that would require more access to her time and attention. She'd declined every time. No was a complete sentence, and Clara had learned to speak it fluently. The divorce had been finalized 8 months ago. Clara had kept her married name, not out of attachment, but because the work she was building existed under that name now. Thompson no longer meant Stefan's family. It meant her legacy. She was Dr. Clara Morrison Thompson, bioethicist, patient advocate, the woman who'd survived death and refused to disappear. The ceremony began. Local officials spoke about healthcare access. Patient representatives shared stories of lives saved by medication assistance programs. Dr. Amara Singh talked about the importance of ethical oversight in pharmaceutical development. Then it was Clara's turn. She walked to the podium, looked out at the gathered audience, and spoke without notes. This center exists because someone believed that unchecked power leads to unchecked harm. My father-in-law, Owen Thompson, built a pharmaceutical empire, but he never forgot that the purpose of medicine is healing, not profit. When he gave me the authority to protect that mission, he wasn't just giving me power. He was giving me responsibility, the responsibility to ensure that patients aren't collateral damage in the pursuit of shareholder returns. She paused, let the words settle. I almost died 18 months ago, and when I came back I had a choice. I could return to a life where I'd made myself small, where I'd accepted invisibility as the price of peace, or I could choose something different. I could choose to matter, to use the authority I'd been given, to build something that served people who've been forgotten by systems that prioritize profit. Clara looked at her parents, at Ruth, at Amara, at Daniel. This center is that choice made visible. Every person we serve, every medication we make accessible, every pricing manipulation we expose, that's what it looks like when you refuse to stay silent in the face of injustice. The audience applauded. Clara stepped back, cut the ribbon, and watched as the first patients entered the center that would serve thousands. After the ceremony, Ruth approached her, pulled her into a tight hug. I see a lot of people survive things that should have killed them, Ruth said quietly. But not everyone survives into a better life. You did. I had good help, Clara said. No, you made a choice. That's different than help. Later that evening, Clara returned to her apartment, the space she'd chosen herself, decorated in colors she loved, filled with books she actually read. It was smaller than the Thompson estate, but it was hers. Entirely, completely hers. She poured a glass of wine, sat by the window overlooking the city, and let herself feel it. Not triumph, not vindication, just peace. There were still moments she felt the weight of those 7 years, moments she mourned the time lost, the research unpublished, the version of herself she'd abandoned. Grief for wasted years was real. But regret? No, because those years had taught her something invaluable, what she would never accept again. Her phone buzzed, a message from Daniel, asking if she was free for dinner tomorrow. She replied yes, smiling. Then another message appeared. From Stefan. I saw the coverage of the center opening. It's impressive. I underestimated you. Clara read it twice. She considered responding, considered saying something gracious, something that closed the loop neatly. Then she deleted it without replying. He didn't get her attention anymore. Not her anger, not her forgiveness, not her explanation. He got her absence. And that, Clara had learned, was the most powerful response of all. She set the phone down, finished her wine, and looked out at the city lights. She was no longer disappearing. She was luminous, whole, free, and for the first time in 7 years, Clara Morrison Thompson belonged entirely to herself. Not because someone gave her permission, because she'd finally given it to herself. The woman who'd learned to vanish had learned something stronger, how to be undeniable. And the life she built from that knowledge was the truest inheritance of all. If this story resonated with you, if Clara's journey reminded you of your own struggles with invisibility, neglect, or the courage it takes to reclaim yourself, then you're in the right place. This channel is dedicated to stories that don't just entertain, but reflect the real emotional battles we all face. Stories about dignity, power, identity, and the choice to stop shrinking for people who refuse to see you. Subscribe to Billionaire Romance Stories by Dennis so you never miss a story that might just be the mirror you need. Hit that notification bell, because every week we're bringing you narratives about people who chose themselves when the world told them to disappear. And if Clara's story helped you see something in your own life more clearly, leave a comment. Tell me what resonated. Tell me what you're reclaiming. Because you're not just watching stories here. You're part of a community that believes your voice matters. Your dignity is non-negotiable, and your presence deserves to be seen. Subscribe now. Your next chapter is waiting.